Okay, welcome everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Managing Conflict and Tensions at Home. My name's Marina Webster and we're joined by Jane Busby, and she's going to introduce herself shortly and tell you a bit more about herself. We thought we'd put this video clip on YouTube because we specialise in having the crucial conversations and mediation, and I think with the current situation in lockdown, you know, with the best will in the world, we've been in lockdown now for a long time, and just annoying things, you know, things can easily escalate and get out of hand. And also we've got the worry of, you know, people have got the anxiety of worrying about their own health or their partner's health or their family, their extended family, as well as obviously problems or concerns about work and working from home as well. So things can, you know, all of us can end up being a little bit more tentative, if that's the right word. So our goal for you today is to give you some really good top tips on how to manage things well at home, how to stay really resilient within yourself, how to stay resilient as a couple and as a family, and how to use the right words and manage yourself and the relationship really well. So just a little bit about my background. I'm trained in the psychology of human behaviour. I've worked as a culture change specialist and culture and behaviour change specialist for the last 15 years. Prior to that, it was very much for the last 30 years I've been working as a leadership coach and trainer in the art of influence and persuasion. There's all sorts of things really, but that's my background. I do spend a lot of time helping teams and individuals manage crucial conversations well at work, as well as helping couples manage their relationships well. So Jane, if I just hand over to you, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Marina. Yes, I'm Jane Busby and I specialise in dispute resolution. So I help individuals and couples who are going through separation and divorce. And I've worked in this field now for almost 30 years as a divorce solicitor, as a family mediator, and also as a divorce coach. And I've also presented the court-directed Separated Parents Information Programme, which is to help parents manage conflict constructively and also helps parents improve their communications or strengthen their communications as separated parents. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Jane. So I just want to talk about the big picture. At the big picture, the higher level, if you like, the helicopter view, so to speak, most couples want to be in a great environment. Most families want to have a lovely environment that they're in, that there's really a good atmosphere, that we're really supportive of each other, that we have our interests together as well as having our own interests, and that we get personal space. And I think the coronavirus has made that a lot harder, but we have times together as a couple, times together as a family, but people really do need their personal space. And when people are working from home, and I'm sure you've all managed this now, is to have a schedule about who's in what room, when, that sort of thing. We're not going to go into that level of detail. But at a higher level, whether I'm working with a couple or whether I'm working with teams or boards, at a higher level, people tend to want the same thing. And if you go back to when you got together, you know, when people are in love and all the rest of it, then obviously all these things are happening. And I think with a crisis like this and over time, things can go downhill a bit. So our goal is to help you manage conflict well. And I just want to talk about conflict. Conflict is normal. It's the normal thing that happens in couples and teams, with groups of people, and there's a very big difference between constructive conflict and destructive conflict. And we're going to talk a little bit about both, but today, as I say, is top tips. And then if you want more information or to have some coaching or couples counselling, then Jane and I could definitely help you with that. So our goal is to help you catch it early. Even if things have gone terribly wrong, you can still turn things around and get it back into a really good place if you work on yourself and work at it together as a couple or as a family. So our goal is to give you some top tips on how to handle it well within yourself and also with you as a couple or a family. So what does constructive conflict look like? That's the question, isn't it? Well, the most important thing, and one of the most important things, there's sort of 4 key ingredients to this, is you have to get the timing right. If you are absolutely furious or really upset, or you're in a really bad place generally, that is not the time to have what I call the crucial conversation. We're going to give you tips on how to have the crucial conversation, but the first point is to get the timing right. If you're in a bad mood, it's better to say to the family, do you know what, I'm not feeling brilliant today, I'm going to sort of take myself off for the next hour and, you know, avoid talking about it at that point. But you don't forget about talking about it. You say, yeah, let's talk about it tomorrow morning. So you've both got to be in a calm, solution-focused state before you get into the conversation. Emotionally, you might still feel charged about it, but you're feeling generally quite calm and not, as I say, angry or really upset. And Jane's going to come on to this shortly. The second thing that's really important is it's all about negotiation and compromise. And I'm sure if you've been in a relationship for a while or been in relationships before, you'll understand that. You've got to have really good negotiation skills, and you also need to know when to compromise. The other part is the words we use. The words we use are absolutely key, and that's one of the areas that I specialise in, is the language we use. So Jane's going to give you some tips on how to do that. And then we're going to, the fourth thing that's really important is knowing when to let things go, you know, particularly in situations like now. Sometimes people are feeling a bit moody and they're almost taking it out on their partner. They don't mean to, but I call it throwing the negative ball to them, and then they feel better, but the partner's got it. So there's something about knowing when to let things go and not do that. As I say, take yourself off or talk about something else or do something else. So I'm now going to hand over to Jane, who's going to talk a little bit about how you manage this within yourself. Thanks, Jane.
Thanks, Marina. Thanks for that. So at this point, I'm just going to share some slides with you. So just bear with me while I get these up. Okay, so in my section here, I'm going to be dealing with how you manage your emotional response, because managing your emotional response is as important as how you manage your interactions with others. And whilst you can't control what others do, you do have a measure of control over how you react. And so hopefully what I'm going to be saying very shortly is going to help you manage your emotional response, which is so important. So my first tip on this section is not to confront issues if you are experiencing an intense negative emotion such as anger. Speak when you're angry and you'll make the best speech you'll ever regret. And the reason for this is that when we experience intense negative emotions, the body's fight or flight stress response activates. And this response developed millions of years ago to help us from physical threats, such as, you know, being pursued by a predator. But in modern times, the brain can't differentiate between an actual physical threat and an imagined one, such as an emotional threat. And what happens when we experience the fight or flight stress response is that the emotional part of our brain overtakes the rational thinking part of our brain, because it wants to prepare the body for rapid action, either to run away or to fight. And in so doing, all bodily functions such as rational, calm, logical thinking are suppressed. So no amount of telling yourself or someone else telling you to calm down, dear, will actually help you, because you have stress hormones that are being pumped around your body, adrenaline and cortisol, increasing the heart rate, increasing your blood pressure to prepare you for action. And as I say, no amount of telling yourself or someone else telling you to calm down will work. So what will work? Okay, so what will work is to actually move your body. You actually have to physically calm down, not mentally, but physically calm down. before you can counteract the stress response. And movement is the best way to do this. So given the current restrictions, go for your daily walk or your run, or do an online workout, run up and down the stairs, go and do a bit of gardening, you know, whatever's going to work for you, but you need to get moving so the body can get rid of those stress hormones. Another way to alleviate the immediate effect of the stress response is to try mindful breathing. And research has shown that mindful breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, what this means is that it helps the body restore itself to a more calm and composed state, and it does that by slowing the heart rate down. So, for instance, with mindful breathing, you could try breathing into the count of 4 and breathing out to the count of 4. Or you could try 7-11 breathing, which is apparently very effective at calming you down. So you breathe in for the count of 7 and you breathe out for the count of 11. So in the longer term, ways to alleviate stressful situations include my next tip, which is to be compassionate with yourself. Notice if you have any negative thoughts. Talk to yourself as if you talk to a friend who's in distress. And the brain actually cannot differentiate between you talking to yourself and a friend or a therapist talking to you. And in that process, the brain sends signals to release the feel-good hormone serotonin, which is going to make you feel less irritable, and it's a good thing. The other thing is to do something that's nice for you. You know, go and make a hot cup of tea or have a nice hot bath, listen to some soothing music, whatever works for you to make you feel good.
Great, thank you. Oh, sorry, Jane.
Sorry, no, there's a few more tips on this section. The next one is to develop emotional awareness. Now, studies have shown that emotional awareness dampens down the stress response and helps us deal with conflict more constructively, and also makes us less irritable. And when I say developing emotional awareness, what I mean by that is being able to identify emotions that you are feeling as precisely as possible. So each emotion, such as say anger or fear or sadness or joy, they have a scale of intensity. And at one end of the scale, on anger, for example, you can feel mild irritation. And at the other end of the scale, you can feel extreme fury. And so the better able you can identify where you are on that scale of emotion, the better able you will be able to respond constructively and positively in a conflict situation, whereas unlabeled emotions go misunderstood, leading to irrational actions and far from helpful choices and behaviour, counterproductive actions. So that's the importance of developing emotional awareness. It's so that you can think how you're feeling, and then you can respond with thought and respond constructively to disputes. So that's the end of my section there, Marina.
Thank you, Jane. And so at the moment, we're very focused on how to manage yourself. So, you know, part of our work is about helping people be the best version of them. So if I'm in a really good place and I then go and have, I'm well prepared to go and have a really good conversation that's going to work for both parties. So on that note, so we've been talking about that, and I just kind of want to finish off with, again, these are just top tips, pick out what works best for you. That if you are just feeling frustrated or moody, whatever, it is good to try and explore what that's about. But sometimes we just need to get it out of our system. I know some clients of mine, they've got a punch bag next to their desk because they're in a high pressured situation. So just hitting the cushion, I know it sounds crazy, or writing things down. What we're trying to do is get it out of here and out of you, if that makes sense. So even just writing it down, putting it in a drawer somewhere or on an email, do not send it to anybody, leaving it for a day or so, and then you feel a lot better about it and you're not all wound up. So that's another way of doing it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at the Gottman Institute. They specialize in relationships, and he talks about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in terms of relationships. And the reason it's called that is if you do these 4 things, it kind of makes 90% of relationships, if they continue to do these 4 things, it's going to end up in splitting up or being really unhappy. Now, when Jane and I first looked at this, we don't sit here going, oh, we've arrived, but we have got the skills and the knowledge to avoid this as much as possible. So we're going to watch the clip in a moment, and there's 2 things. A, listen to what they're obviously talking about, but B, they're going to give you some great ideas, some top tips, if you like, how to make sure as a couple you don't do these things. So let's just watch the clip.
You're so selfish.
Ugh, what an idiot.
It's not my fault we're always late.
Forget it.
Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Dr. John Gottman calls these negative communication patterns the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse because they'll lead to the end of your relationship. In fact, he can predict this relationship failure with over 90% accuracy if the behavior isn't changed. So, what can you do? Well, at the Gottman Institute, we understand you might not even know you're communicating this way, or you might not know how to control it. But if you practice the following 4 research-based antidotes, there is hope for your future. Criticism attacks the character of the recipient, instead of focusing on a specific behavior. The antidote to criticism is to talk about your feelings using I statements, then express a positive need. Contempt is an expression of superiority that comes out as sarcasm, cynicism, name-calling, eye-rolling, sneering, mockery, and hostile humor. Contempt is the greatest predictor of relationship failure and must be eliminated. The antidote to contempt is to treat one another with respect and build a culture of appreciation within the relationship. Defensiveness is self-protection through righteous indignation or playing the victim. Defensiveness never solves the problem and is really just an underhanded way of blaming your partner. The antidote to defensiveness is to accept responsibility, even if only for part of the conflict. Stonewalling occurs when the listener withdraws from the conversation without resolving anything. It takes time for the negativity created by the first 3 horsemen to result in stonewalling, but when it does, it can become a habit. The antidote to stonewalling is to break for at least 20 minutes. Calm down, then return to the conversation. Spare your relationship from certain destruction.
Great, well hopefully you will find that helpful. I'm now going to go into a little bit about how the mind works, and the reason for this is, like sometimes something can happen and people interpret it in very different ways, and I'm just going to touch on this. So at any moment in time, 200 million parts of information is being fired at you through your senses. Consciously, we remember 5 to 9 parts. So what we have to do is delete, distort, and generalize things. Otherwise, we just couldn't take it. But we remember 5 to 9 parts, and that's why we like doing lists, because our brain consciously can only retain so much information. Subconsciously, it stores a lot of things. That's our memories, our significant experiences, our values, our ways of our attitude, if you like, the words we use. It's all stored in this beautiful brain of ours, and what happens within seconds, these things happen to us and then we make meaning of it. And it's a bit like so my goal in telling you this is that we delete, distort and generalize information. My goal is that you can frame it and pick out information or way of looking at it that really works well for you. So if you think about a photographer taking a picture at weddings, they take loads and loads of different shots and then they pick the best ones. So when you're thinking about this, it's like thinking, okay, well, I'm deleting, distorting and generalizing. How can I frame this in the way that's going to really keep me confident, resilient, as well as being able to have the crucial conversation with my partner? So we'll go on to the next slide because this talks about it a little bit more. So what can happen is we can get stuck into what I call limiting loops of thinking. And so something happens outside, we then perceive that to mean whatever, we evaluate it as good or bad, we then make a decision about it, we then have compensating behaviour, and then that impacts me, but it also impacts the relationship if it's to do with my partner. So let's do an example. If my partner, when they come in from work, goes, oh, I just want to go for a run and I really want to talk, the meaning I could attach to that is he's not really interested in me, he's just interested in him. And then I might decide, okay, if he's going to do that, then sod it, I'm going to ring up my friend or talk to the guy at work or whatever. There's my compensating behaviour. Then that will impact the relationship, and it's starting to, if you like, it could be the start of the relation weakening, if you like, the trust and the relationship. So what we want to do is to have positive loops as opposed to negative. So if you were putting a positive spin on this, it may be, and I knew this, that my partner goes, well, actually I've been at work all day, I've been talking to people all day, I don't really want to be talking, I just need to go for a run, let's organise it when we can do have a conversation over dinner. So that's a bit of a negotiation point. So that's just an example. And if you can see on the loop there, once the loop is formed, we want to be right about it. So just notice if you're getting into negative thoughts of thinking. So if we can have the next slide. Brilliant. And this model here, I'm not going to go into it in a great detail, but you can see we can come from the drama triangle or we can come from the leadership triangle. And the leadership triangle, if you like, that's about leading yourself, leading your relationship. We don't want to come from drama when we're going to get into constructive conversation. So if we can go on to the next slide. So this is how to get out of a loop, and this is how to get back into, if we were using the leadership model, that quadrant. The first thing we get people to do, and just pick out the ones that work for you, because this is quite a few tips. The first thing is to focus on their strengths. Whenever we're doing mediation or going into crucial conversation, the first thing we start talking about is your strength. What were your strengths as a couple? What's your partner's strengths? Why did you get together in the first place? So we're going to start at that level. That softens everything. We then look for the positive intention in their behaviour. So if you use the example of someone going running after work, your partner going running after work, I looked at the positive intention and thought, oh, that's because they need to de-stress, and they also explained that to me. So we look for that, and the reason for that, it takes the sting out of it, because quite often when these things get triggered, they're getting triggered things like rejection, or they're not interested, that sort of thing. So we try and do that as much as possible. Again, the next point there, when you communicate, start at the big picture where you both agree, which is again going back to, we do want to resolve this, we do want to be together as a couple and be in a great environment at home. So you start there, start with the strengths. Both of you stay solution focused, don't go back onto, as they said in Gottman, blaming or criticizing. That's just not helpful. So both be solution focused and discuss the benefits of change and the consequences of not changing. So I'd start at the bigger picture, and then we'd start going into the detail about what we want to do. Nobody likes being told what to do. Generally, nobody likes that, and you might get a buffer if you start doing that. So the best way of doing it is to make a request. So rather than telling someone, have it as a request and then agree, can we both sign up for this? And this is a big one, and I think this happens a lot, that you avoid tit for tat, because it's another example, someone's on their computer all the time, then the other one comes and goes, oh well, they're not interested in me, therefore I'm going to get on the computer all the time. And we're getting into this, what I call tit for tat. It reduces trust, it has a negative outcomes ultimately, so we really want to avoid that. And it's okay to talk about the tit for tat. I go, oh, I noticed you did that then, yeah, and I did this because of that. You know, that would be when you're having the crucial conversations, not necessarily at the time. It may work at the time, actually. And know when to let things go and accept the situation and focus on the things that you can influence. Now, one of the reasons couples get into conflict is because their values get violated. Values are the guiding principles by which we live. We tend not to question them, but boy, if someone violates your core value, then you know about it and they'll know about it. So it's important to review your values about what drives and motivates you. Some might be, most of them will probably still be current, but one or two may be out of date. And again, in a coaching session, we could help you let go of that. But it's important to frame the situation, as I talked about earlier, in a constructive way, in a way that can work for both of you as much as possible. But you also need to stay true to your own values. So think about that long term. I'm now going to hand you back to Jane, who's going to just talk about a few more tools.
Thanks, Marina. Sorry, I've just got to find my slide. It's just, sorry to dart around. So yes, so in this section, I'm going to be talking about actually managing your interactions as part of the family and managing family group dynamics. So I've got a few tips for you here. So my first tip is to hold regular family meetings. Now, so this is a really good time in lockdown to be holding regular family meetings, because this is your chance for you and your family members to check in with each other, how everything's going. It's also an opportunity to identify any issues that are arising that need sorting. It's also an opportunity to try and resolve problems and conflicts before they escalate. And they don't have to be formal, they can be quite informal. So, you know, maybe mealtime is a good time to have them. And make sure you keep the meeting short to avoid boredom. Make sure there are no distractions such as the television or devices are turned off. Include everyone. It might be helpful to have an agenda so that items don't get forgotten. And also you can have an agenda in advance, maybe pinned up on a whiteboard in the kitchen, so that people can put down things that are bothering them and then they don't get forgotten and they're brought up at the meeting. And make sure that when everyone speaks, everyone else listens. Sorry, when someone speaks, everyone listens to whoever's speaking and they're listened to without interruption, so that everyone feels heard and understood. Also, it might be helpful to write down what's agreed at the end of the meeting to avoid any future misunderstandings. So my next tip is to have ground rules about living in the family home. It may sound quite straightforward, but quite often people just get confused about who's doing what and who's using which room. So it can be quite helpful to have some ground rules about use of communal family rooms, for example, the kitchen, the living room, or the bathroom, which can be a problematic area. So, you know, having those ground rules can really help on using the family home. Also about who's doing what task, etc. in the family home, whether it's putting out the rubbish or doing the washing up or whatever it might be, or maybe supervising the children with their schoolwork. As long as it's clear, then there should be no misunderstandings between you, because, you know, you know exactly who's doing what. Now, my next tip is to avoid using language that uses blame and judgment. So this is sort of developing what Marina was saying about being careful about your use of language and being constructive. So what I might mean by this when I say be careful about your language, statements that include blame and criticism against a person can make them feel very defensive, can make them feel resistant and very uncooperative. It's far better in resolving disputes to use I statements rather than you statements. So, for example, you're always late, or you're just like your mother, you're just like your father, you never do this. Those are going to evoke a defensive response in the other person. It's far better if you can use I statements. So, for example, when you do this, it makes me feel irritated, or it makes me feel very sad because I like to have things done in an orderly fashion. And so just, you can give a brief explanation of what you'd like them to do, but you're far more likely to have the other person's cooperation and understanding if you turn it around and say how their behaviour makes you feel. My next tip is to focus on the future and not past events. We all have different perceptions about what happened in the past, and talking about past events can lead to circular arguments and tit-for-tat arguments. It's far more constructive to focus on what you want to happen in the future instead. And my next tip is to accept this temporary situation as normal, although it may be challenging. And we are in unique times. We've never experienced anything like this before. And it's only normal and natural that there will be tensions, and that, you know, it will be difficult because this is such a unique situation. And sometimes we will say something or do something that is hurtful to others. That does happen from time to time. But, and this is a big but here, if that is forming part of a consistent pattern, it could be an indication of domestic abuse. Now, domestic abuse is defined as a pattern or a one-off incident, but a pattern as well of coercive and controlling behaviour, which can not only include violence or threat of violence, but it can also include emotional and psychological control, and also financial control. If you feel that you could be in an abusive relationship, it is vital and important that you get specialist help. And there is a lot of help out there at the moment. And also, if you feel in danger, or if your children are in danger, you should not hesitate to call the police on 999. The police do take these matters extremely seriously. And I do know that calls to the domestic abuse helpline have increased by almost 50% in the last few weeks. And finally, on this point, I just want to say that leaving the family home is an allowable reason for leaving the home in this time of lockdown if you feel worried about your safety. So back to you, Marina.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. So look, just to recap the high level, there's loads of top tips in there. Always start at the big picture. Think about the what's in it for them to want to have the conversation. And I do think both parties need to be doing this, but one of you might take the lead initially. But think about the what's in it for them, the benefits for us having a conversation, you know, as a couple. And Jane mentioned there about talking about feelings and owning your feelings, and that's when you put a request in. So you might say, I find this difficult, could I request this? And it's the same for your partner, it's not just one-sided. And, you know, worst case scenario, we can talk about the consequences. It's okay, you know, the consequences of us keep being on, doing our own thing, being on our iPhones all the time, whatever it is we're ending up going this way. So let's try and get it back to a really good place so that we're going to come out of this stronger, wiser, and hopefully tighter as a family and happier as a family and as a couple. Back to Jane. Anything you wanted to say, Jane?
Just very briefly to say, it's so important to try and develop that awareness of your emotional response, just so that you can pause and then have time to take considered action so that you're less reactive and you can deal with disputes and conflict far more constructively.
Fantastic. We'll put our phone numbers up and email addresses. So we're just going to get the slides back up. So if you'd like to contact myself or Jane to chat things through, or to book a coaching session, here it comes. And sorry, that guy on the surfing on the wave, it's ride the wave of the coronavirus and let's come out of this a lot stronger and wiser. So yes, thank you very much.